Go ahead and sit. So if you're new here, just a heads up that this morning is very different at LifeSpring. It's not a normal Sunday. I'm not going to preach a normal sermon. We asked everyone to come and be gathered for a Sunday where we're going to talk about the vision of our church community, who we think God is shaping us into being, and what we think our next life, our future life as a church looks like. Part of that is that we want to kind of give you some updates and some perspective on where we are financially as a church. And so I'm going to invite my friend Natalie Raworth to come up. Natalie leads our finance team, and she's going to come up and share with you some basics on our finances. And then Leslie Zarita, and I don't know if Amy's coming too, but okay, Leslie Zarita is going to come. She leads our strategic team and kind of give some perspective on that. And then I'm going to come and kind of talk about vision and bigger questions. So take it away, Natalie.
Welcome, everybody.
You probably have to hold that real close. Okay.
There goes my pen. Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, so in case you don't know me, Bob and I, we've been at LifeSpring since about 2004. I don't really know what year we started, but it's around 2004. And we have served in a variety of capacities in the church. And a couple years ago, Fran wanted to start up a finance team again, and that just spoke very strongly to me. In the past, on the finance team, there was no women, and I felt like they need a woman on the finance team. So, but more than that, I think that one of the things I found out about LifeSpring very early on is they have always been open about their finances. I had gone to other churches in the past where they were very closed about their finances. They just asked you to give every Sunday morning, and you didn't really know. There was some team meetings I went to at LifeSpring many, many years ago. It was called Ministry Forum. You used to do them at your house. And there was a finance report every month at that meeting, including salaries. And these were just things I had never seen a church provide to the regular people like myself. And so I've always felt then very comfortable about the finances at LifeSpring. So I just wanted to give you my personal perspective on that. But starting in 2018, we put a team together, and we took a look at the processes and decided to streamline some of those processes. So we changed things like the payroll provider, and we did other things just to make like doing online payments and things like that. So there wasn't so much, day-to-day work that needed to be done, like writing a check and sending it in for your utilities. I mean, why do we need to do that? Everything can be done online now. So we did a number of those things. And then we took a couple of months and we did some cost-cutting measures. So we took a look at where we were, spending money again, like things like utilities. One of our guys called up Waste Management and said, "Why are you charging us so much? We don't create that much garbage." And he was able to get a reduction in that. So we did a number of things like that. When things were finally starting to feel normal on the finance side, then COVID hit, and so that was a new challenge. We weren't coming to church, and luckily, we have a lot of ways for people to give. So you can give online, you can open up your phone, you can give, and we also had the ability to have services over Facebook Live so that people could stay connected, and so that helped. But each time I come up here to talk about the finances, I feel like I'm either saying it's really great or it's not really great. And I try to stay conservative with that, yet I don't really want to be negative. And since I don't come up here every month and talk to you about it, I feel like the last few times I came up, we were kind of in a good place. And so I was able to say, hey, we're in a good place. So I'm going to present the numbers to you. I'm not going to, say, oh, we're in such a bad place, but, we're not in the best place, is kind of, what I want to get at. So if you guys want to put the first slide up there. My new best friend, Amy, she created these for me because I was on vacation, so I couldn't do it. So I'm going to say publicly to Amy, thank you again for doing this. So I'm giving you a snapshot of where we're at, and I'm really going to talk to you more like LifeSpring is a business, because honestly, there's an aspect to it. It is a business. And then later on today, you'll hear about the other side of things, which is less businessy. Our fiscal year runs from July 1st through June 30th. And so in the upper left-hand corner, I'm showing you what's gone on so far in the current fiscal year. So from July 1st through January 31st, our income, so the money that we brought in, was $183,000, but our expenses were $195,000. So you don't need a degree in math to know that we did not bring in enough money to cover our expenses. So the difference is $12,000, which is a lot. If you think even from your own personal finances, you don't want to come in $12,000 short. There was actually nothing unusual that happened during that time. The leaders in this church understand that there is not tons of money to be spent, and this was basically bare minimum expenses. Nothing really stood out that was outrageous. Like, we didn't have to replace the roof during that time. And then to the right of that, I just show the general expense breakdown so that you understand what our expenses consist of. In the orange, which I don't know how well you can all see that, though, which is 48%, that's salary and benefits. So, that, and believe me, our employees, so I'll call them employees, Fran is an employee, Linda is an employee, they don't make a ton of money. So, but it does represent 40% of our monthly expenses. The blue, 39%, that's our mortgage, and that's only our mortgage. I don't have the utilities and everything else baked into that number. Our mortgage is $10,819 per month, so that's a big number. And by the way, we've never been late or missed a mortgage payment, which we have to keep telling the bank, hey, we're good. It's never happened. There's been a couple of months that this goes back a couple of years, that I was really worried if things did not change, we might have missed a mortgage payment. It did get that close, but we've never missed one. And then the small, the gray, 13%, that's operations. That's everything else. So that's utilities, that's some of the insurance that has to be paid. That's supplies for the building, the cleaning supplies, things like that. And again, we're doing the bare minimum. And I know for a fact that some of the ministries here at the church, the ministry leaders are paying for things out of their pocket. And so if you think that's not happening, it is happening. And so we've asked them, though, to keep track of those things, because we do need to understand exactly what it takes to run this church business. But 13% is operations. So, so what we did recently in our strategic team, Leslie in particular, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Fran said, hey, we've done everything that we're supposed to be doing, but we should have a budget. And, and if you work in a business where you have to do budgeting, it's like, I hate doing a budget, but I don't like doing it at home either. But it's important to have a budget. So the strategic team went to the leaders and said, okay, this is how we're going to do the budgeting process. Here's what your actuals have been from the last 6 months or 12 months. And since we're in the middle of our fiscal year, let's just do this for a 6-month time frame, to finish out. So January 31st through June 30th of this year. So they went through that process, and they came back and said, okay, these are the essentials, the mortgage, the salaries, there are things that just aren't going to go away. But but again, that little piece of the pie, the operations, there are things we're not really doing because we haven't had the money or just because of the weirdness of COVID, and we need to get back to that. So what would those things be? And we'll see what we can do with it. So each of the leaders went through that process, and they identified what their typical expenses are, and then kind of like wish list things. Especially in the technology area, I mean, there are definitely some needs. So most things that were costly were not approved because we're not in a place that those things could be approved. But there were a few things that were approved. But they came up with a number that is $170,000. So that's what, if we do the things that we want to do reasonably, that's what the spend would be for the 6-month period, January 1st through June 30th. But what do we think our projected income would be? And since our projected income is really based mostly on giving, we needed to take a conservative approach to that. And so the number is $132,000. So again, doing some simple math, if we only bring in through donations and some rental income $132,000, but we spent $170,000, we again have a shortfall. So where does that shortfall come from? So if you go to the green box, I took a snapshot of our savings and checking on February 15th. Our checking account, we kind of treat that as just our operations account. So most of the income that comes in from the donations goes into the checking account, and we pay our bills. Our savings account, I have always treated that as our emergency fund. So as an emergency fund, which you should have that at home as well, that is there to do a couple of things. If we have an expense that comes up, like for instance, we did have a hole in the roof and we needed to do a quick emergency repair, we've got the money to do it. If there was a family in the church that a sudden need came up, and that has happened here, we could take it, some sum out of that, could be $500, and bless that family and help them get through, their situation. So without having that savings account, we won't be able to do those things. But more importantly, what the savings account has been doing for us is it's making up the difference, our shortfall for each month. And what that means is, over the last several months, we've been chipping away at the savings account. So every time I look at the savings account, it's lower, and it's unfortunately in a downward trend. Okay, so if you guys could move to the next slide. And again, if we look at our first 7 months of the fiscal year, rounded out, we were at a $1,700 shortfall. So we've been chipping away at the savings account more or less at that rate. But now if we look at our budget, the budget we want to have in place for this last 6 months of the fiscal year, the first 6 months of the calendar year, if nothing changes on the income side, we're going to be chipping away at a rate of $6,000 a month. And again, if you just did a little math with that savings account, 10 months. So if nothing were to change, in 10 months, we'll be down to zero. And if we're down to zero, and we don't have that to chip away at, the following month, the 11th month, we are either not making the mortgage payment, we're not paying the salaries, we're not paying the lights. And I know in my heart that that's never really going to happen, but when you look at the facts, there is a trajectory where we could, where that could happen. So I just, and again, I'm not presenting it as doom and gloom, I'm presenting the actual facts to you. Okay, so a couple of years ago, the savings account was at, and that's a great question, Laura, thanks for asking that. So the savings account was pretty low for a period of time. I think it was sitting at around $20,000, $30,000. And so a couple of things happened at the beginning of COVID that enabled us to build up the savings account. So one of those things was the PPP loan. A lot of businesses took advantage of that, but churches were able to take advantage of that. So through the Small Business Administration, it started out as a loan. I'm going to forget. I want to say it was $30,000. Okay, I looked at my sidekick in the back. It was $30,000, which is a number that we requested. And honestly, I think we could have gone a little higher, but we took a conservative approach. And so several months after that, because we met all the requirements of the PPP, we were able to take advantage of the loan forgiveness. So we did not have to pay that back. And because at that time everybody was giving, we were paying our salaries out of the normal giving, so that $30,000, we put that into the savings account. But there was one other thing that happened. There was, and I don't know if it was a federal thing or if it was the state of Illinois, but for 3 months, we did not have to pay, we had to pay our mortgage interest, but we did not have to pay our mortgage principal. So for those 3 months, we weren't paying $10,819. We were paying, we didn't pay the interest? Oh, they tacked it on at the end. So, okay, I thought we still made the interest payment at the time. So we took that amount that we would have normally paid each month, and we put that into our savings account. Now, what we could have done is we could have said, let's just go spend it, right? If you didn't have to pay your mortgage at home, you would be like, oh, I've got an extra $1,000. I'm going to, go to Kohl's. But, so there was no going to Kohl's. We took that $10,800, roughly, put that into the savings account. So that built the savings account. So now those mortgage payments, they didn't go away. They just got tacked on to the end. But it gave us some relief at that time. And again, during COVID, there was a reduction for us in some of our expenses. We weren't holding services, so like some of the utilities went down. I mean, these aren't big numbers, but they're numbers. And people still were giving. The biggest challenge in all of this, though, and I think when the ladies went through the process with the budgeting, is really on the income side. Expenses are straightforward. I mean, we know what most of that is. We even know the cost of the things that we want to do that we haven't been able to do. But what is really hard for us on the budgeting side is to understand what the income level is. And I'm not saying this to be critical, but in just looking at the number, and I don't look at people's individual giving, by the way. I don't know any of that. But what I do see is the overall trend, and it's like this. I mean, it's ridiculous. And over the years, we've tried to understand what that trend means. There is a little bit of extra giving at the end of the year, typically. But in general, we can look at monthly averages, but those are numbers that are really hard to work with. And so when people don't give consistently, that actually makes it really hard for us, to plan. And again, we watch the numbers, there'll be a big month and then there'll be a small month, and there'll be 2 big months and then there'll be a medium month, and there's no consistency to it, and that makes it really hard to plan. So, and if your income worked that way, you wouldn't, you know how that works on your finances. It's really hard to plan for that. So. Okay, so those are the facts and the figures. That was all that I wanted to share with you today. Leslie, there she is. Leslie's going to come up here. So Leslie and Amy are part of the strategic team, which is new to LifeSpring, not that new anymore. And but I'm just going to say I appreciate them for the things that they do and the things that they're thinking about, and the questions that they ask, and just a new perspective of how to look at things. So, oh, sure.
I'm assuming that you plan to know the baseline of everybody who has donations that occur every month.
Okay, so the beauty of people setting up the online recurring donation, the beauty of that is that does give us a baseline, but not everybody does that. So I don't know what that baseline is off the top of my head. For me to look at that, the reason why I don't look at that, Tim, is because I have tried to be one step away from who gives what. Okay, so I know that there are a number of people that do that. I don't know what that dollar amount is, so I can't give that to you. All I can tell you is, what the total is, and it comes in a lot of different ways. If you're in a position where you could set up your giving to be that way, that's going to be helpful for us, to do that, because then we kind of know that it's there. So, okay, in the back.
Yeah, one question. When you talk about all these special projects and everything that we have, is there a list somewhere that we can see those? The reason is because with a big group like this, we probably know a lot of people that would probably give us discounts. Maybe we could do some forgiveness on that. I was just wondering if there's a list out there that we can take a look at for, getting people to go into the special project.
Okay, so I think through the strategic team, since they're no, but you. No, but that is where that level of planning comes from, is through the strategic team. So I think that's something we could work on. Maybe throw it into the Life Spring Splash or something like that. Yeah, okay, I just handed it off to her. Okay, before I hand the microphone off to her, is there any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you gave her a round of applause, because she's absolutely fantastic. I know I would never in a million years want to be the person looking at all the money and trying to make all of the pieces fit. So she is extremely dedicated and faithful and fantastic, and just give her another round of applause with it. Now she's coming back. I don't know what this means.
No, actually, I'm not. It's not just me. Okay, so there are other people who have been on the team in the past. Some of them are in this room. One's in the back. One is up there. So it's not just me. It's a team of people. Okay.
This is true. Though she is their leader, and she's fantastic. And I did also want to call out Chuck Mansfield, because he's been working as our bookkeeper, and he's the one that, gets all of the payments out and takes care of. She's coming back again. I have about 12 things here. You got to come up after each one.
She mentioned Chuck, and I forgot to say something that's really important. So Chuck, in addition to being part of the finance team, when our last bookkeeper left, we were just kind of doing it ourselves. So he actually took on that role, because that is a paid position. But because of his job with the Department of Energy, he's not going to be able to do that anymore. So we are actively looking to fill that role. So if you have any interest in taking on that role, let somebody in leadership know. And we want to make that transition sooner rather than later, so that I'm not doing it. And we'll train you, but if you have any, any understanding of finances or accounting, that would be extremely helpful. Okay.
You sure?
I'll just stay right
Okay. But with that, if you could just please give Chuck a round of applause for all that he's done as well. Okay, so now switching from all of that into the strategic side of things, I have to tell you that I was given a lot of leeway on what I was going to say. You should have given me a shorter leash, but you didn't, and I thank you for that. But I was given a directive to cut it straight. Now, any of you guys who know me well know that I am a straight shooter anyway. I don't do dishonesty well. If I am dishonest, you can read it all over my face. It's extremely obvious. So I am going to cut it straight for you. One thing that I want to start out with is right at this moment, this very moment in time, our cash position is better than it was when we started COVID. So that's because a lot of you guys have been faithful givers and have made that possible. Yeah, there have been some other components that have been part of that as well, but without people being faithful givers, that wouldn't happen. So I'm going to step out of my lane for a second and talk about tithing, which is not really something I've ever done here and not something I'm greatly comfortable doing, but I'm going to do it anyway. So Brian and I give electronically, we give online, and part of that is because the way that our dynamic works. We came to church a lot of times and it was like, did you bring a check? No. Did you bring a check? No. Okay. So setting it up online was fantastic for us because we didn't have to remember to do that. The problem is, for me at least, when I would put my envelope in the basket, that was kind of a sacred moment between me and God. It was a time for me to say, I recognize and understand all of the blessings that you've given to me and my family, and I want to give some of that back to you. And it was also a time for me to say, okay, the money that you've entrusted to me that I'm giving back is money that's going to go do some phenomenal things through this church. So win-win for me. Giving electronically, I don't get to do that tangible putting into the basket, but I see the email come in that says my donation is being processed. I see that tithe hit my bank account, and those things still happen for me. So if you are currently not a consistent giver, or if you're new to our church community, I just want to invite you in to that process. I want you to be part of that process because there's something amazing that happens through all of us giving. So now I'll get back into my lane and talk about everything that I'm supposed to talk about. So we are in a little bit better cash position, but you heard everything that Natalie said. We're spending more than we are bringing in at the current moment. I'm going to be real with you. I'm not going to be all Pollyanna and say, everything's going to be fantastic. We have nothing to worry about, because that's not realistic. But I'm also not going to be Chicken Little and say, oh no, the sky's falling, we're in dire straits, everything's going to crumble. No, that's not going to happen either. The reality is, churches all over our country are struggling, and churches are closing. So I read a couple of statistics. One that said, it was earlier on in the pandemic, there was a projection that said 1 out of every 5 churches was probably going to close their doors. 20%. 20% of churches in our country were likely to close their doors. Then I read something else that said by the late 2020s, about a third of churches were going to close their doors. Now that's just not just because of the pandemic. There's a lot of things that go into that, but a third of churches. So do I want us to be one of those churches? Absolutely not. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I know for me, when I think about this church, and I think about this community, this family, I can't walk into any other church and find that same thing there. There's something extremely special about this church. So I do look at those numbers and I think, okay, we don't want to be in that place. What can we do to change it? So that's one of the things that, as a strategic team, we look at. We look at all of the moving pieces. So let me give you just a little bit of, a history or something about how our team works. So if you ask any church, including ours, where does your vision come from? Well, it comes from God. Yeah, duh, obviously, right? Here's the difference. We have a pastor who is so faithful and so committed and so open that he prays and he reflects and he prays and he ponders and he prays and he listens and he prays and he talks. And through all of that, God reveals what our vision is. So then Fran takes that and he brings it to the elders and they pray through it some more as a group and they ponder it and they question it and they refine it. And then that vision comes to the strategic team. And we take that vision and we basically say, okay, how do we get from where we are right here to where that vision is taking us in that direction? What do we do for that? So part of that was the budget process, which you heard about, and figuring out the things that we need to do to take us in that direction. But that process also provided some clarity for us and focus as a team. And it also confirmed some important things for us. One of those things is that where Fran feels God is calling us, yeah, that's where we feel God's calling us as well. So is the financial situation concerning? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I stood up here and said, oh no, it's not, that would be a lie, because it does concern me. It would concern me if it was my finances. It concerns me if it's my church's finances. When we were newly married, we were super lean. We made nothing. Brian was enlisted in the Air Force. We made very little. I literally would go to the commissary, for those of you who are not military, grocery store, with my calculator and my list and how much I could pay and spend. And everything that went in my cart got put into the calculator. And when I got to the number that I was allowed to spend, if there was list left, decisions had to be made. So through all of that, when I was struggling, I'd go to God and have him guide me and lead me and help me through that. It's no different as a church. We're going to do those same things. We've been doing those same things. We've all had times in our life that have been lean. Some of you all may have lean times right now. Some of you are going to have lean times in the future. That's just a reality of life. The thing is what we do with those lean times. So we can look at everything that's being presented today and look at only the bad things and say, oh my gosh, this is what they talked about and it's a bad thing. Or what I would rather challenge you to do is pause and reflect. Because if you reflect and see what's inside your heart, you're going to get ready to see where God's leading us, and you're going to be willing to go. So we think that the Lord has some really amazing places for us as a church community, if we want it. If we want it. Okay? As I thought about what I was going to say today, one thing kept coming to mind, and that thing was, God's going to get on the bus and sit in that driver's seat. He's going to expect us to take care of the bus. He's going to expect us to put gas in the tank. He's going to expect us to make sure that the bus is operational and that the tires are good and that we have oil and all of those things. And then he's going to expect us to get on the bus if we want it. Okay? So that's a huge thing. We talk about this stuff a lot as a team and about putting legs to the vision that we're going to go for. This is a really important moment for our church, walking into that. So I'm going to invite Pastor Fran to come up here and put some perspective on everything you've heard today and give you a glimpse into what's ahead.
You know, after listening to Natalie and Leslie share with us this morning, the first thing I want to say to you is that I think that those churches that resist women in leadership are out of their minds. God has been faithful. You know, we've been at this for 28 years. Linda and I came to Plainfield. When I told Linda we were going to plant a church in Plainfield, I said, I'm sure of it now. This is what God wants us to do. I came home to our little apartment in Naperville, and Linda said, I'm sure. This is it. Plainfield is it. And Linda said to me, do you know anybody in Plainfield? I said, no, but I've been walking around down there for a year, walking the streets and praying, and the Lord has got it. And God's been faithful, and he's going to be faithful, but what we're talking about this morning is, what does our response to his love and faithfulness, what is that going to look like? So I had a funny experience this morning. I sometimes go to Dunkin' Donuts. I get up very early on Sundays because I like to have time to pray. And I sometimes go to Dunkin' Donuts to get coffee early. And often this same young Indian guy, who's a nice guy, you know, waits on me as I pull up to the drive-up window. And as I was pulling up to the window, I've had a few people have asked me, how are you feeling about Sunday? And I've said, I am a mixture of joyful anticipation and great trepidation because of some of the things that I'm going to say and share and try to point us to this morning, some of which you've heard me say before. So as I'm pulling up to the drive-thru window at Dunkin' Donuts, I said, Lord, I'm just asking you to give LifeSpring as a community, a great day today. I pull up to the window. The guy hands me a coffee. He never smiles. He smiles real big, and he says, "You're going to have a great Sunday." And I was like, okay, God, all right. So I'm going with that. And anyway, I'd like to pray before I start to share with you. And we're going to go a little long this morning, and you guys are going to live with that. Father, your church, not mine, doesn't belong to the leadership team, just belongs to you. Just the church, it's just the community of Jesus. The community of these human beings that you are making new, that you are restoring our sight and healing our hearts and helping us find really what is really, really, really the way of life. And so, Lord, as I come to share these things this morning, I pray that you would give us eyes to see and open hearts and a bent in our hearts and minds, Lord, towards seeing the great beauty and glory of who you are, what you want to be to us, what you want to do through us. That's my prayer. In the good and strong and beautiful name of Jesus. Amen. So I think if it's okay, I'm going to sit today. I normally stand when I speak, and I kind of want to sit because I don't want you to hear me preaching today, because I'm not really going to preach. I'm not going to preach a Bible text to you today. I want you to feel like you're sitting in my living room, and I'm sharing from deep places within myself. And this kind of is our living room together, isn't it? This is the living room we all gather in as a church community. So the first thing I want to say to you this morning is I just want to say thank you for being here. I know that some of you haven't been here for a while for different reasons, and others of you, we've all, well, let's just be honest, people come to church less since the pandemic hit and gave us so many options, and you've taken the time and decided, and some of you traveled a little bit. I'm looking at you, Stacy, to come and be a part of this community this morning, and I just want to say thank you. I appreciate that, and I know I've been making a big deal out of this season for us as a church, and you being here says that you're attentive to that you're listening. So Natalie has shared with the numbers with you, and Leslie's given you some perspective, and I just want to give you, before I talk about what I might call deeper things, I just want to give you a couple little tiny bits of perspective on the money stuff. One reason we struggle as a church is the size of our mortgage. We bit off a lot when we built this building. Everybody in our church community at that time voted to build this building, to take on that mortgage and to do this thing. But the mortgage is big, and there's a reason for that, why it's bigger than it used to be. Commercial mortgages renew every 5 years, and I think this is information maybe hasn't been shared very much around church. And 5 years ago, our bank decided they really wanted to see us paying down more principal than we were each month. I mean, just like your mortgage at home, if you have a mortgage, we were paying principal and interest, but they said, we really want you to be paying down more principal. So they shortened our loan amortization from 25 years to 15 years, which added about $2,500 a month to the mortgage. So that's a lot. And we all went, ugh, and we argued it, and we fought it, and they said, no, it's what we got to do, and so we swallowed it. And that's what raised our mortgage payment to like $10,800 a month. So if we were a family, we would say that makes us a bit house poor at this stage of our life. But I want to just say a couple little things about that. The first is that I don't regret us building this building. I think it is great for us to have this home that we get to use 24/7. I think we have a great future in this place. And also, I want to make sure you understand that at the current rate of payment, it means this whole property is paid off 10 years from now. Because that was 5 years ago. They put us on a 15-year plan. So I don't know if that's the way it'll work out. Maybe at some point, the finance and strategic team and the elders will decide to refinance to a longer amortization to lower the payment. I don't know. But the idea to me of this church community owning this entire 11-acre property in this building in the heart of Plainfield 10 years from now and not owing a cent on it, man, that's a big deal. 10 years is not that long in the life of a mortgage or the life of of a church community. So the other thing I just wanted to touch on is that how I think we get from here to where Leslie's was telling us this morning that we kind of need to go. You know, you're going to hear over the next few weeks that the solution to our financial issues is for all of us to give more. That's always what we hear when churches are struggling with finances. So before we go to that place over the next few weeks, I want to say that we as leaders all know how many of you are faithful givers, how many of you give faithfully and generously, and you're the reason why, you know, there's money in the bank and bills are paid and the ministry is provided for. So for others of you, maybe, you know, you've sat back a little bit on the giving side, or you're new to our church community, and as Leslie said, great time for you to kind of step in. But having said all that, I know that the long-term solution to our financial issues is really for this church to grow. And because when there are more people in the LifeSpring community, then there will be more giving, and it'd be easier to pay the bills and have ample funds to do all the things that God calls us to do. So that day is coming for us to grow, and that will change the equation. And that's a long way of saying it isn't all on you guys, but it is at the moment. You get that, right? It isn't all on you guys, the whole future of giving in LifeSpring Church. But in this moment, because we are LifeSpring Church, it is on us to do that giving and to provide for the ministry. So the growing will come, but what we decide about some things over the next few weeks will determine whether we are really ready to reach out and grow again. And that's really what I'm here to talk about. So I'm just asking you to pray about these things, about giving, you know, to be open-hearted and to be responsive, and then we'll get there. So, but what I'm up here to talk to you about is that I think all of this question about our future, and some of this depends on how people think. Some people think a lot about money. Some think, oh, the whole future of the church then is about these financial questions. I don't think that. I think the financial question is set within much larger questions about who we are going to be as a church. And you might think that as I talk about the question of who we're going to be as a church, that's just more sort of blah, blah, blah pastor vision talk, because pastors do that. And you might say, okay, this is the part where Pastor Fran does the blah, blah, blah pastor vision talk. But the question of who we become as a church has become much more serious in recent years, because the church in our culture is dividing and debating more than ever over what Christianity even is and what the church should be and look like. And I take all this really seriously as your pastor, and all our leaders at LifeSpring do, because what we think Christianity is about in its essence and what we think the church should be like, the answers to those questions impact what we teach here and how we approach big issues and questions and how we walk together and how we live out this Christian journey in the world and what we think we are offering to people who walk through these doors. That all gets answered by what do we think Christian faith is about and what do we think church is supposed to be. I said last Sunday that I was glad that the pandemic stopped us short of our recommitment process that we were in 2 years ago, because we were walking through that LifeSpring history, giving you that tour of history that's up on the wall. And we were coming up to kind of this recommitment point, and then the COVID shut church down. And the reason I'm glad that process got stopped for us is that I think as Christians over the last few years, and especially the last couple, I think that some of the questions have become much clearer. And one question in particular, which everything I'm about to share with you will kind of, in the end, I think, come down to one question. And I'd like to give you a handful of examples this morning. It's not exhaustive, but a handful of examples of the kinds of questions that I think have begun to loom much larger for us as Christians and the church in the time in which we live. And because I don't think it's an overstatement to say that the church in our culture is in crisis. And these three areas I'm going to share with you are just some categories where I see that playing out and that raise questions for us. So the first one I'll mention, which you all may have varying degrees of awareness of, but which I think is still very serious, is what we might call the crisis of leadership integrity across the church in our culture. If you followed the stories of the falls of megachurch pastors and leaders like James MacDonald, Bill Hybels, Ravi Zacharias, and Mark Driscoll, these are all shipwrecks caused by the mentalities, the power and narcissism mentalities of pastors, of church leaders across our culture. If you've not heard of it, you'd have to make a really long listening commitment to listen to the whole thing. But there's a podcast about the Mars Hill Church and Pastor Mark Driscoll, which was a church in Seattle that no longer exists. It's a Christianity Today podcast. You can Google it. It's called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. And it's sobering, because what it says is not only across the land do we see leaders in churches who love power and domination, but we see large numbers of Christians who adulate and idolize these leaders. Which is so interesting, because what we find in Jesus, we see Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And we find Christians falling at the feet of these dominating narcissistic leaders. Now, I'm not picking on those leaders, I'm not picking on those churches and all those people who have been through such harms, but those churches have shipwrecked and have wounded tens of thousands of people, and tens of thousands of people have lost their faith because of what they experienced in those churches. And so the question is, how is it that we got if we have Jesus in front of us, how did we get our ideas about what integrity and servanthood and leadership, what that looks like? How did we get so mixed up about that? When Jesus is so different from that. And here's what's clear. Those leaders were not asking what the Jesus way looked like, and their followers were not calling into question leaders who were acting so unlike Jesus. And so now we don't believe in that way, in that kind of stuff here at LifeSpring, that kind of shenanigans. We believe in humility, we believe in shared leadership, we believe in healthy relationships, and we believe in fixing whatever goes wrong between us as brothers and sisters. We're fortunate that is our way here, but we should be aware that the American church has this issue, and that we have this issue in the American church because we forgot somewhere along the way that if people are preaching from the Bible, even if people are preaching from the Bible and talking about Christian things, the gospel is an invitation to a new way of seeing and being and living, and that way looks like Jesus as we find him in the Gospels. You're going to hear me say a couple of times this morning, you can't take whatever you want and slap the name Christian on it and say, oh, that must be a Christian thing. It's Christian if it looks like the Jesus that we find in the Gospels. Otherwise, it might not be. That's a longer conversation that we can have this morning, but it's a good example of how the church, while seemingly pursuing Christian things, has lost track of Jesus himself. Another thing that's caused the questions to become clearer for me anyway is watching Christians navigate the cultural and political moment the landscape that we've been through in recent years. An awful lot of Christians, I would probably say, you could argue this with me, I would probably say the majority, have been just as reactive on all kinds of issues as people in the broader culture, just as quick to buy into the us versus them mentalities that have defined this season, shown a penchant for declaring undying allegiance to political parties and leaders, and have acted as if the prime directive for followers of Jesus is something like saving America by fighting an angry and aggressive culture war. Now, please notice that everything I just said doesn't mention any positions on particular issues, like particular political issues, because that's not what I'm talking about. And at the risk of irritating some people, I'm going to say what I have said before. As I watched Christians and listened to Christians on social media ranting about all kinds of issues over the last couple of years, I heard almost nobody appealing to Jesus. They were Christian voices, but nobody was saying, where I see Jesus in the Gospels doing this, that kind of makes me think this. Or when I see the way Jesus treats people, that makes me think, well, maybe we should treat people like this, or maybe we should look at struggling people this way. Or there were almost no appeals to Jesus. And then sometimes when Christians would try to appeal to Jesus, other Christians would shout them down and say, that's not a Christian position, and you're not a good Christian, and even though they were trying to appeal to something about Jesus himself. Here's my assessment, at least in part, of all of that. What we had before this season hit our culture was we had some convictions about Christian values. We've all heard people talk about Christian values in America for decades. So we had some convictions about Christian values, but what we were missing was any real understanding of how to bring the actual teaching of Jesus and the way that Jesus models for us, the way of being and seeing people and relating to people, the way that Jesus models for us. We didn't have any idea how to bring that to bear on all these questions. So we were listening more to people shouting their convictions on the internet than to Jesus. And the culture around us was watching all this and wondering, where is your Jesus in this? I mean, you've heard me say this, every major journal and newspaper in the country has written articles about what is going on with the Christians. We thought they were the Jesus people. And that, for me, has been very sobering. Like what I shared in the letter, if you got my letter in the mail, like what I shared about my little brother who's not a person of faith at this point, and my little brother Richard. And when I was out in California a couple weeks ago, we were modeling Mom's house together, and he said, man, stuff I've seen from Christians makes me dried up any interest I have. I don't even want to know what Christians are about. And what we have to decide here at LifeSpring Church is whether we're going to follow the sides the world defines. See, the world is always defining the sides, picking sides, us against them. It's this. This is how you have to think. These are the good guys. These are the bad guys. And they're defining it, and then we're buying into it. So we have to decide, are we going to buy into the sides the world defines, or are we going to follow Jesus? And when I say that, I mean the full spectrum of the teaching of Jesus, the way that Jesus models for us, which ultimately is the way of love and of servanthood and of self-sacrifice. And if we do that, if we say we're going to center our journeys with Christ and our church community on the heart of God we see in Jesus, the teaching of Jesus, the way that Jesus models for us, if we do that, it doesn't mean we will necessarily agree on every little issue, or that we will all arrive, even if we arrive at the same conclusions, that we will necessarily arrive at them at the same time. It doesn't necessarily mean that. What it means is that we agree on the starting place. That the starting place is the heart of God we see in Jesus, the actual teaching of Jesus, not just something somebody put a Christian label on, and the way that Jesus models for us, rather than a starting place, that we agree that the starting place is Jesus and not Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, internet memes, unfounded conspiracy theories, other fads in American culture, because we're taking our cues from all these other things. And we've got to be careful about that. But rather that we want to take our cues from the heart and the teaching and the way of Jesus. Not only as we wrestle with what to believe, but as we express it and dialogue about it with other people. If we can't agree on the heart and the teaching and the way of Jesus as the lens from which we're going to wrestle with things as a church, I have no idea how to lead this community as your pastor over the years ahead, because I will spend the rest of my life tap dancing between everybody's loud voices that they are parroting from the latest politicians, the latest social media posts. You know, somebody jokingly said to me this morning, you're in a tough place. You have to try to be Switzerland, right? So I don't mind being Switzerland sometimes. I realize that people have different opinions on things. But what I want to be as your pastor is I want to be Switzerland that then, I'm here, but then I step over into a Jesus-y place and I say to France and Germany, you want to come into the Jesus-y place with me? Because that's my lens. That's who I'm following. That's how I'm looking at things. So that has raised questions for me, how we're navigating this stuff as Christians, and we seem to be taking cues from so many places. And in defense of us all, we were unprepared for the moment. But it has been clarifying. And the question is, what do you do with that? And for me, it means that I have to make sure that I, Fran Lehman, am centered in the heart of God that I find in Jesus, the actual teaching of Jesus, not just somebody says, oh, that's a Christian perspective, and the way that Jesus models for me. The third and final category that I just want to give as an example of how the questions have become clearer for me, it has to do with how we as Christians see people. And you've heard me preach about this stuff, so I probably don't really need to belabor the point. But in the last few years, I've seen more and more Christians kind of buying into the demonization of different groups of people that they've been taught to regard as the other. You heard me talk about that even just last week in my sermon. Whether that's Muslims or every person at our southern border or black protesters or Democrats or Republicans or non-Christians in general, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a part of me that feels like if we keep going, there won't be very many groups of people left that we still consider worthy of our love. Because we're coming up with all these other groups. And again, I understand that we have political and sometimes what we think are Christian reasons for these perspectives, but where is the way of Jesus who calls us to love both friend and enemy? Where is the way of Jesus who calls us to see every person, every human being on the planet as an image bearer of God? And so I do have concerns, deep concerns, that we are not taking the lenses of Jesus, the heart of God in Jesus, as Jesus looks at human beings and saying, man, that's how we're going to look at human beings. We still call it Christian somehow. We still put Christian labels all over the whole thing, and yet we're kind of, as I said in my recent sermon, we're kind of shifting people off into these groups and saying, well, you can't, yeah, it's not the Jesus way. And, as long as I'm talking about that, I just want to bring up briefly that we've been in this process for the last year plus in our Crux theological community, our little community that takes the first run at working through big questions and issues in our church community. We've been in the process of talking about how Christians have seen homosexuality and how the church has treated gay people. And I just mentioned that because that's an other group for us as Christians. We're, those people. And in my whole history in the church as an adult, largely the message has been to gay folks, you're not welcome in this church. So we've been working through that, and I just wanted to, because I think I said this recently, but I'm 60, I forget stuff. So I just want to make sure I say it, that our Crux community has asked me, and this probably won't happen until just after Easter, but they've asked me to do a teaching video to help walk you through just the territory we've covered and talked about in the last year. Just to kind of say, hey, here's the questions we've talked about. Here's some of the things that we have learned as we have explored and talked about this issue. Here's some of the conclusions we've come to, and some of the things maybe that we all don't have figured out yet. To do that, and then with you having kind of soaked in, with us having shared with you our conversation, that would be a good way to put it, then to invite any of you who want to come to an evening of conversation, of congregational conversation. We'll come together, and it'll probably be the first of many, but where we'll come together and talk about that. Because everybody bears the image of God. Jesus has lived that in front of our eyes. So we have to say, so what do we do with that? We cannot, anyway. Understand, I'm not picking on anyone here, except maybe all of us. What I'm saying is that Christians of all people are supposed to be the ones who have compassion for all people, who identify with people's suffering, who are good listeners because they have humility to know that they don't know everything, and they see every person as bearing the image of God, and they remember that God loves every person, is actively reaching out to every person, and that Christ died for the redemption and restoration of every person, which is a long way of saying that as followers of Jesus, we don't really get to write anyone off. But we've become sort of good at it. So how did we get here to the place where Christians, like so many other people in our culture, think that it's okay to kind of disdain and despise other groups of people? I know this. We did not get there by reading the Gospels and watching how Jesus does it with people. We did not get here by doing that, right? I mean, and understand, as I speak this morning, I'm not advocating a particularly detailed position on immigration or trying to parse for you the complicated, multifaceted nature of protests over racial issues. I'm not subtly trying to bend your perspectives on those things. I'm suggesting that we get our Jesus-style lenses back on for how we see human beings. So, 3 examples I give you. The character of Christian leaders and how Christians have fallen into this thing of idolizing and adulating dominating and power-hungry leaders, how we navigate the cultural questions, and the incredibly strong gravitational pull of partisan politics. How's that for a phrase? I think that's true. The incredibly strong gravitational pull of partisan politics. And the easy way that we fall into demonizing and despising people that Jesus loves. We desperately need the heart, values, teaching, and way of Jesus back in the center of our Christian faith. That's what I'm saying. And the heart and the way of Jesus is so beautiful. Like it can sound, I give all those examples, I know it can sound argumentative. What I'm really trying to say is the heart and the way of Jesus is so beautiful. It's the only hope. Do we really believe that people are going to find God and find new life, and that the kingdom of God will displace the darkness of the world because we as Christians are screaming at people about politics, cultivating a reputation for despising various groups of people, and modeling and admiring the same dominating behavior the worst leaders imply? Do we really think that that's going to drive away the darkness of the world? We've lost the gospel if we think so. So I said earlier that I think it all comes down to one question. I think that question is whether, as people trying to follow Jesus, we will continue to allow our ideas of Christianity and the church to be co-opted by all these other things, right? By partisan politics, by us versus them mentalities, or any other ideology that somebody says, oh, that's a Christian way to think, or that's the Christian viewpoint. Or, I need a sip of water. Or whether we will set our eyes again on Jesus, the Word who was with God in the beginning, and we became flesh. If we will set our eyes again on Jesus as we find Him in the Gospels, and center ourselves in His heart, in His own teaching, and in the way of seeing and relating to other human beings that He models for us. If we've learned anything in the last couple of years, it's that we cannot have it both ways. The name of Jesus on our lips, but rooted in other things. We were talking at our core leaders meeting a couple Sundays ago about how having to wade through these questions. And you understand, I didn't make these questions up. They came to us. And we kind of went, oh, what do we think about these things? What do we do now? Well, we were talking about how having to wade through these questions is really a distraction from actually what we're supposed to be doing as Christians and in the church. Our calling as a church is to love Christ, to walk together in His light and love, and to hold the beauty and goodness of that forth so that other people can see it and can find it and be made new by Him, right? But the gospel, the good news, it's not our politics or our judgments on the people of whom we disapprove, nor does the gospel come across through us puffing out our chests and getting loud and acting like those people who love the wrong kind of power. That's all a distraction. But until we escape those distractions, we won't be centered enough in the actual good news of Jesus to help anyone else get a hold of it. For all the noise Christians have made in the last couple of years, I haven't had a single non-Christian say to me, wow, I've really been able to discern the good news of Jesus through all the things the Christians have been yelling in our culture. I haven't had anybody say that to me because I think that the actual good news of Jesus has not been getting a lot of airplay. We need to get back to the things that Jesus came to bring. Because here's the thing, while Christians have been getting lured down all these side roads, people out there are still hungry and thirsty for the real thing, for hope and for life and for the joy that has been eluding them. And what they're longing for is what Jesus is and what Jesus brings. And we get to hold that forth as a community. We get to hold all that good stuff forth as a community if we want to. Or, as we have now seen, we can be something else. We get to talk about compassionate Jesus. We get to talk about the Jesus who heals hearts. We get to talk about the Jesus who shows us what God is really like. We get to talk about the Jesus who shows us the way, the Jesus who delivers us from all the lies that we have believed about ourselves and about life. We get to talk about the Jesus who gives us new hearts, the Jesus who opens the imagination of our hearts to wonder, the Jesus who opens our eyes to just how glorious all these other human beings around us are. We get to talk about the Jesus who gives us brothers and sisters with whom to share the road. We get to talk about the Jesus who restores relationships. We get to talk about the Jesus who drives away our fears and teaches us the most elusive art and passion of all, which is the art and passion of love. We get to do that. Together, here as the community of faith at LifeSpring, we get to be that if we want. But we have to be clear on where we're centered and who we're centered in. And the result will be, as it so often has been at LifeSpring in the past, that people will make friends with people or go serve them somehow, or they'll walk through these doors, or they will sit at one of our LifeSpring tables, the ways that people gather around here, and the love and light of Christ will touch them. And it will seep into them. And it will begin to teach them and heal them. And love will begin to make them new. That's the church I want to be. That's the church I want to be a part of leading. A church that walks and talks and sounds and smells and tastes and dances like that Jesus who walks and talks and dances across the pages of the Gospels. That kind of church is what I believe our next life, our destiny is about here at LifeSpring. We have let God reshape us in a number of ways over the years. And those of you who've been with us a long time, you know, you've been with us in some of those bends in the road. In some ways, I think this is our biggest reshaping yet. But there's another part of me that says, well, yes and no, because I believe a lot of what I'm talking about this morning, and I know some of you are thinking about this. I talked about some of this stuff a while back in a smaller forum at a gathering we had, and Marilyn, you came to me and said, I thought that's who we already are, right? So I know some of you are thinking, Fran, what you're describing, isn't that what we already are? So maybe it's not that big a reshaping. And I think that's true because I believe that's a lot of who we already are and have been becoming. But I think now it's important for us to hang it on the wall, big and bold. This is a church centered in the heart of God revealed in Jesus, in the teaching of Jesus, and in the way of being and of seeing and engaging people that Jesus models for us. But here's the thing, it's not up to me. See, that's the thing about leadership at LifeSpring. I'm not your dictator. It's not Fran's way or the highway. It's not up to me, it's up to you. It's up to us. We have to choose this kind of road, this kind of faith together. You have to actually choose it and say, this is the church that we want to be. So we're going to take a little journey this spring. And it's just beautiful, not planned. It's just beautiful that it coincides with the season of Lent. You know, I don't know, Lent to some people just sounds like this old religious thing that we left behind with the churches of our youth, but you know what where the word Lent comes from, don't you? It comes from an old English word, lengthen, that has to do, it sounds like lengthen. It has to do with the lengthening of days as winter gives way to spring. Lent is really a synonym for springtime. What a time of year for us to be talking about these things. That God has a springtime for us as a church. And it just happens to fall right here. This coming Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. You come to Ash Wednesday service, I hope. And then that kicks off this springtime season of Lent that takes us right up to Easter. And so we're going to take a journey. And because here's what I'm not doing this morning. I'm not saying this is what I think our next life as a church looks like, and so we're going to give you a pin and you can prick your finger this morning and sign in blood before you walk out of here. It's not what we're doing. We're going to take a journey, and here's what that journey is going to look like. Each week for the next 4 weeks, you're going to get something from us as leaders, a written piece or a video that's going to explore a different facet of what we think it means to be a community of faith centered in the heart of God revealed in Jesus, in the actual teaching of Jesus, and in the way that Jesus models for us. So we're going to say, this is what we think that shape kind of looks like in more detail than I can give you sitting up here this morning. And then on Sunday, March 27th, we're going to have what I'm just calling our Consecration Sunday. And basically, it's going to be an opportunity for all of us to come to LifeSpring on that Sunday morning and to say yes to that vision of being the community of Jesus. Just to that. That vision you guys have been painting about what it means to be the community of Jesus, we're saying yes to that. And then for the 3 weeks after that, that's sort of the midpoint Sunday, each week you're going to receive something from us that's going to help you think about what does it look like for each of us to be a committed part of a community like that. To say we're in. It's not just that ideologically we're saying that's a good vision of church. We're saying what does it look like for me to be a participant in the community of Jesus in these ways. And then on Easter Sunday, April 17th, we're going to, and it's just beautiful that it falls on Easter. I guess it'll depend what you guys choose, but we're going to come together on Easter Sunday, and it's going to be our day to draw a line in the sand, I hope, and say, this is who we are as a church, and we are committed to it. This is our identity as a church. This is where we root ourselves. In the heart of God we see in Jesus, in the actual teaching of Jesus, Beatitudes, Sermon on the Mount, the stuff Jesus taught, and in the way of Jesus that he models for us with people. And if we do all of that, then that will be us stepping into what I believe is our next life as a church. And for me, it's a big, you can think whatever you want of it. For me, it's a big deal. So here's what I'm asking you to do, because I am asking you to do some things. One is I'm asking you to take seriously those, we're calling this whole process the road together. Got to have a road together. This is the Jesus road together. And I'm asking you to take seriously those road together communications that you're going to get each week, to read them. And I know that some people will probably get them and go, yes, another thing from, my church, blah, blah, blah. Each Lent we ask you to focus on the journey of your heart. And this year we're asking you to focus not only on the journey of your heart, but the journey that we share together as a church community and what it would look like for us to live that out. You're going to, then secondly, you're going to receive a prayer as you leave here today. You're going to receive a little sheet that has a prayer on it. And it's called the prayer for the road ahead. And I'm asking you to take 10 or 15 minutes a day, pray that prayer, and get quiet with God. And let him speak to you about your own heart, and let him speak to you about what it means to be a part of this community in a way to let God bring you into a fresh place with Jesus, a fresh place with Christ in your life. And then, if you wanted to, you could start solving the financial problem by giving more right away if you're an early adopter or if you're new here, by stepping in and saying, okay, it's time to start giving. You could do that. It's my biggest fear that you'll walk out of here today, you'll remember that we talked about finances, and you'll think, that was great information that Pastor Fran shared about where our church is going. It was nice. That's my biggest fear, is that you'll think it was nice. But hear me when I say this, I really want it to be so much more than that. I'm asking you to engage a process of us opening our hearts to the Lord, of us exploring and wondering. See, the faith has been co-opted. I'm just going to be bold and say this. It's been co-opted by so many things in our culture that we actually have to now stop and wonder and ask God to remind us what a beautiful community centered in the ways of Jesus would look like. Oh my gosh. I'm asking you to engage a process of praying about that, wondering about that, exploring that, for us to explore that together, and what it would look like for all of us to come together and be that. And I'm asking you to engage, to commit to this 7-week journey that starts this morning, because I believe that what LifeSpring will be or not be in 10 years depends on whether you and I personally take this journey. Because if we don't, LifeSpring will float along and you won't even remember that there was a day where Pastor Fran said something nice about vision. I want you to look back in 5 years and say, I remember that bend in the road. We took a turn. We hung it on the wall. We said it's the Jesus way, and we hung it on the wall. And it gave us direction, and it rooted us in love and truth and goodness. And man, that was the day that it got firmed up. So I'm asking you to engage personally, to make it your own, to own the journey, to think and pray and reflect deeply about what it means for us to take a Jesus-centered road together. And I think if we say yes to it, I think it's going to be amazing. I think the best is undoubtedly then yet to come. So I know what time it is. Let's pray. No. Let's stand up and pray. Let's honor the God who has come to us in Jesus and at least stand our bodies erect in this place and say, Lord, we're standing here. We're standing here this morning in your presence. We're standing here this morning in your community. And Lord, we confess this morning, we've all gotten distracted. We've all taken some funky turns. It's happened to all of us. But as we sang earlier, you always come around again, don't you? You always come and find us. And you say to us, hey, I've got something better. I've got a better way to be and a better way to live. So take my hand and come with me. And let's go there. And let's let that light shine big. Lord, I pray that you would take this little LifeSpring community and in Jesus, centered in Jesus, make it the most beautiful, most alive, most life-giving, most transformative, most restful, most joyful thing it has ever been. Because it's yours. And if it's yours, it should look like you. And if it looks like you, it's going to be glorious.